on the line, if you would like permission to record, please let us know in the chat. We'll get started in just a few minutes. All right, one more time. If we're missing anyone who would like to record, that we please let us know in the chat. All right. Good morning. Today, the bill sponsors, along with family members of Black Marylanders who've been killed or brutalized at the hands of police, and leaders with the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, have come together to provide updates and to advocate for the 5 key policing reforms that need to be passed during the 2021 Maryland General Assembly. These are repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, restoring local control of the Baltimore Police Department to the people of Baltimore City, securing transparent investigations into police conduct under the MPIA, limiting use of force by law enforcement, and removing police officers from schools. First, we will hear from Yannette Emanuel, Public Policy Advocate for the ACLU of Maryland. And again, we ask that everyone mute themselves when you are not speaking. Thank you.
America's policing system is not broken. It's working exactly how it was designed to. From its inception in the 19th century, when white people were recruited to track down and catch Black people who were enslaved, to now when police disproportionately track, brutalize, and kill people, America's policing system's roots were birthed and are grounded in white supremacy. This past summer, we witnessed nationwide protests in the wake of police officers murdering George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But here in Maryland, we still remember victims of police killings in our own backyards and support communities advocating for reform in their names. Emmanuel Oates, Anton Black, Leonard Shand, Corin Gaines, William Green, Tyrone West, Archie Elliott III, Gary Hopkins Jr., Robert White, Fanon Burhay, Freddie Gray, and too many more. We also recognize that there are far more people who survive police violence and are forced to live with the trauma and PTSD every day. Many of the police reform demands we're advocating for this session have been introduced time and time again, and it's a shame that over many years, the General Assembly has failed to pass reform measures that actually could save Black lives. Legislators owe it to the victims of police violence and their families to move their Black Lives Matter tweets and posts into action this legislative session. Power over law enforcement must shift into the hands of the community, and we must end the failed practice of the police policing themselves. Anything that doesn't achieve this is not enough. Benjamin Woolman, the lead lobbyist who drafted the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in 1974, was known and investigated for his role in helping officers in Prince George's County stage robberies and lure young Black men into committing them. This group of officers, widely known on the force as the Death Squad, were only revealed to the public after a couple of informants and the widows of the victims killed by officers during a couple of the robberies came forward to file a civil rights lawsuit. It is not a coincidence that the special rights for police that were advocated by Woolman and the environment that allowed for the PG Death Squad to exist, that led to the creation of Liable, also allowed for the unchecked abuses in the Gun Trace Task Force. Both the Gun Trace Task Force and the PG Death Squad, and everything in between, are abuses experienced primarily by Black and Brown communities, but swept under the rug for the larger, wider public because special rights under Liable block transparency and accountability. And the unfortunate reality is, we have no idea if other jurisdictions across the state have a gun trace task force or a death squad within their departments, because Maryland's current public information law allows no transparency over how police departments handle complaints from the community. The opposition is going to say this is taking away their due process rights, but the balance has been so skewed in their favor, these reforms only seek to even the playing field. The repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and the reform of the Maryland Public Information Act are two reforms that are intertwined. Liable reform is the end of the process. It's after an officer has already been found guilty. And MPI reform is about holding police departments accountable for everything that comes before the guilty finding and investigation. So next, you will hear from some of our legislative champions and speakers that will talk a little bit more about these demands and share their stories that highlight the real impact of these issues in our community.
Thank you, Yannette. Next, we will hear from Delegate Deborah Davis.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity to be here. I would like to first talk about the use of force bill that is House Bill 139, and it is co-sponsored in the Senate by Senator Jill Carter. I want to take a high-level view on why this use of force bill is necessary. And I am a practicing attorney, but I don't practice in constitutional law or even criminal law. But having worked in this area for a very long time, I want to just try to break it down to the normal citizen as to why it's so important. First of all, we don't have a law. There is no regulation for how citizens and police officers should interact on a daily basis. There is none. And the only way you ever change the law or affect the law is if you have the money and the wherewithal to make it to the Supreme Court of the United States of America and try to inch the law a little bit in your favor. Because police officers generally have the right, if they're in fear of their life, or if they're using police protocol, they can do what they like. And they establish the protocol, they police themselves. As long as they're acting as a reasonable police officer, they are fine. And all of us knew, all lawyers knew when those cases, say their names, when those cases the list started coming down, that we knew that based on the current law, that there would be no convictions. We knew it because there is no law that says it's illegal for somebody to shoot a person who is walking away. You've heard all the stories. There is no law. So HB 139 will establish a statewide law. So everybody in the state of Maryland will have the same expectations of law enforcement. And the best part about it is that it comes with penalties. If these laws are breached by police officers, there are criminal penalties for the first time ever. Of course, it's a high standard, but if you break this law, if the officers break this law, there are criminal penalties. And if police forces as a whole don't abide by the law, there are financial consequences. I think all too often in the legislature, we pass suggestions with no penalties. So I'm really excited about the help that we've gotten from the ACLU. We spent all interim defining exactly what we want. And let me just tell you some high level things that it does. It requires de-escalation. You know, a reasonable officer might not think de-escalation is important, but we're requiring de-escalation. When you walk up on someone, you have to prove, first of all, that you did what you could to de-escalate the situation. And we all too often, we know that that's not the case. It requires a duty to intervene. If another officer sees an officer escalating a situation or using unusual or illegal use of force, then they have a duty to intervene. It addresses when and how or if you should ever shoot at a moving vehicle. So that's important. And how about the common sense thing about kicking a citizen? All right. there are excuses for that if you let someone define for themselves. I could go on and on, but we need your support. We spend a lot of time on this. We need your support, and we need to demand that police officers, that interactions with citizens and police officers are governed by the citizens of our state. And I want to say I had the opportunity to present in front of the Legislative Black Caucus yesterday, and I opened by saying that humane policing is not only a civil right and a constitutional right, but it's a right for humanity. It's a humane right that we all should have. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Delegate Davis. Next, we will hear from Delegate Gabriel Acevedo.
Good morning. First, I want to thank the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability for convening today's presser, but more importantly for working with a number of my esteemed colleagues so we can articulate our vision for a more just public safety system, one that recognizes the historical implications of policing in America, but more importantly, one that recognizes that when we say reimagining public safety, it must mean transparency, and it must mean communities having oversight and control over the way public safety is administered in their communities. And so today, I'm honored to join a number of my colleagues and advocates and advocacy organizations to not only touch on some of the bills that I'll be working on with Senator Joe P. Carter from Baltimore City, but why it's important for us to act this legislative session and to get these important, critical rather, pieces of legislation passed. Let me just first say that Anton Black should be alive today, but he's not. And his death has further exposed really the inadequacy in Maryland state law as it relates to police transparency and accountability and holding corrupt law enforcement officers accountable. Given that over 90% of complaints from the public are rendered as unsustained, if we are serious about reimagining public safety, if we are serious about police accountability, then we must ensure that we begin addressing police violence by ensuring that we have transparency over investigations. Anton's Law, House Bill 120 and Senate Bill 178, which Senator Joe P. Carter will be speaking to in a bit, addresses those inadequacies in Maryland state laws, particularly as it relates to the Maryland Public Information Act. What we know is that the officer involved in Anton Black's death, like Derek Chauvin and a number of other former law enforcement officials, had a very long rap sheet of use of force complaints, as well as use of force reports. And when we fail to flag those problematic cops, we are in essence allowing for those abusive cops to continue within police departments and law enforcement agencies with little to no accountability. And so Anton's Law seeks to reform the Maryland Public Information Act to ensure that we are not only providing complainants or the public with information that they're requesting, but we're making police misconduct records public. And the reason why that's important is, as I alluded to earlier, former officers like Derek Chauvin and others have had a history, an abusive history, that had this information been accessible to the public or complainants, we would be able to identify, root out, and address those problem and abusive cops. Unfortunately, that is not the case today, and Anton Black is not alive. And so we are reintroducing Anton's Law for the third session, recognizing that we should be listening to families and communities most impacted by police violence when we talk about addressing police violence. And this is legislation that we have worked with the community, with the family, with the Coalition for Justice for Anton Black and the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability. It is the right bill. It is what we need, and it is critical to the police accountability conversation. Let me be clear that if we repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and we do not pass Anton's Law, we are not achieving real transparency and accountability. Anton's Law and LEOBR repeal are inextricably linked. If we are repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, we must pass Anton's Law. I'll also point to a recent poll that was done by Goucher College in Baltimore that showed 87% of Marylanders support, and I'll repeat, 87% of Marylanders support creating a record of police misconduct cases that would be available to the public. So in other words, 87% of Marylanders support Anton's Law. It is time for the leadership of the General Assembly, Speaker Adrian Jones, and Senate President Bill Ferguson, as well as the leadership of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, to listen to the people of Maryland, to listen to Marylanders when they say they support Anton's Law, and to ensure that we're prioritizing it this session and we're getting it passed. We have to get it done. It is critical, but it is certainly a part of the broader police accountability conversation that we all should be paying attention to. So with that, I will hand it back, or I see my esteemed colleague, Senator Joe P. Carter, is here with us. But this is a really critical bill. And we have to honor the family. We have to honor the community that are still hurting and reeling from Anton Black's death. And the only way for us to really address the issue of police violence is to listen to the communities most impacted. Those closest to the pain are closest to the solution, but seldom are they closest to power. And so we should listen to LaToya Holly. We should listen to Anton's mother, his community and advocates, and we should pass Anton's Law, reform the MPIA, and ensuring that we're getting radical transparency in the way that law enforcement agencies do their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next, yes, we will go to Senator Jill Carter.
I'd like to thank the ACLU and all of the advocates, parents, and families that have advocated for much needed police reform in Maryland for many years. It is the legislative failures of the past that have brought us to the point where we are today. It is legislative failures of the past, refusal to reform policing in Maryland, that gave rise to the death of Anton Black, William Green, Corin Gaines, Freddie Gray, Tyrone West, and a myriad of others, Ethan Saylor. These injustices go back for years. We did not need to witness the killing of George Floyd to understand the gravity of this problem right here in Maryland. And so I'm advocating a full repeal of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, as well as Anton's Law, as well as working with my colleague, Deborah Davis, on a uniform use of force standard that is comprehensive, and we look for it to be the model for this country with the best language and the best practices that we've seen by taking a compilation of what is best from other places. I commend my colleague Gabriel Acevero, Delegate Acevero, on his tenacity in pushing forward justice for the family of Anton Black and all the other victims in the state of Maryland that have been unable to access police investigative records of their own family and loved ones killing by police. Those that have been unable to access disciplinary records, investigations of officers that have committed grave misconduct. It is our inability to access these records that gave rise to the Gun Trace Task Force, because the Baltimore Police Department's Internal Affairs Division for years turned a blind eye to those kinds of misconduct, excessive force, and outrageous behavior allegations. In doing the package of legislation and passing the package of legislation, the cumulative effect of these efforts will result in a reimagining of not only the way that policing is done in a just, humane manner that respects the sanctity of life, but also the ability to weed out, as we've heard for so many years, those bad apples that don't deserve to be in policing, that we cannot trust with the lives of our constituents, and we cannot trust with the lives of our families and communities. And so I'm very proud and pleased to see that we have such a collaboration amongst legislative leaders and advocates, and most of all, our families and our victims. I just want to briefly say that repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights is among the most important of all of the legislation. It is that legislation that has created a two-tiered system between how law enforcement officers are treated and protected and given privileges disguised as rights versus other public employees and everyone else. When we abolished the death penalty in Maryland, we should have also made it clear that extrajudicial killings must also be repealed, that we will not allow law enforcement officers to act as arrestor, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner on the street. And so I look forward to passing these bills. I have every hope and faith that we will pass the bills. The Senate of Maryland has been working on hearing these bills ever since the month of September, and we are very close to getting them through committee and to the Senate floor.
Thank you so much, Senator Carter. And I do want to point out to everyone that there are detailed fact sheets that are being linked to from the chat on each of the bills that we're talking about today. We're hearing from one more of our legislative leaders, and then we're going to hear from directly impacted Marylanders telling their stories for support for the legislation that we're demanding in 2021. So next we're going to hear from Delegate Janelle Wilkins.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for including me here. Again, I'm Delegate Janelle Wilkins. I represent District 20 in the Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, and White Oak areas of Montgomery County. And I am really proud to introduce legislation related to removing school resource officers from our schools, because a school should be a safe and welcoming place for parents and students, rather than another opportunity for developing minds to be traumatized and encounter the criminal injustice system. In Montgomery County, where I represent, 460 students were arrested in the past 3 school years. Of those arrests, 83% were of Black and Latino students, 83%, while only 11% of arrests were of white students during the same period. MCPS student population is 21% Black and 32% Latino. And this data tracks statewide and national trends. The data shows that schools with cops are more likely to refer children to law enforcement, including for non-serious violent behaviors. This is not something that we can train our way out of or make cosmetic changes to fix police in schools and try to reverse the trends in data. The fundamental role of our police is law enforcement, and this is not the goal of our schools. Parents are sending their students to school to learn, not to encounter the law and be set on a path toward additional encounters with the injustice system. I'm proud to introduce Counselors Not Cops, which is HB 496. It's a companion bill to Delegate Acevero's school resource officer legislation. HB 496 will stop the $10 million in state funds that supplement school resource officers in local school systems. Instead, it will shift the focus of our state funds to data-driven tools and necessities that actually help our students and families. It will shift this $10 million to supplement school counselors, mental health, restorative justice, and trauma-informed practices and programs. These are programs that have been a goal of the state in terms of working on trauma issues, working on restorative justice. As someone who serves on the Ways and Means Committee, we have been scrambling for dollars and resources to actually implement these types of programs. And so defunding the $10 million to our school resource officers will actually help accomplish the goals of our legislature and our state. Proud to work with this coalition to help ensure the passage of HB 496. And thank you again for including me.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Delegate Wilkins. Next, we're going to hear from Dawn Dalton.
Good
And there's
morning.
information about her in the chat.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dawn Dalton. My reason for speaking today is to give a voice to those individuals that are living. We constantly hear about all of the victims of police killings or police killings and their family members that have to deal with the trauma at the hands of PGPD. My son is a survivor of an assault at the hands of Prince George's County Police Department, and pretty much he was assaulted for driving while Black. My son is only one of thousands living with the trauma of being beaten, falsely charged, losing your job, navigating the criminal justice system, all while coping with physical and emotional injuries. Families are traumatized, communities are traumatized by egregious acts of officers and excessive use of force in Prince George's County, Maryland. I have lived in Prince George's County for 48 years. And as a resident of Prince George's County, it's a well-known fact that the culture of policing is egregious. I mean, it happens all the time. I know that from 2016 to 2019, there have been 6,800 use of force complaints against Prince George's County officers filed. However, I would like for you to imagine how many young men of color have been beaten, falsely charged, or harassed that were afraid to file any type of complaint. They were afraid for fear of retaliation by the very officers that police the communities that they live in. I would like to sum it up by saying this. My grandfather was one of the most honorable men I've ever known, and he was a police officer. So I'm not saying all police are bad. What I am saying, though, is that officers in Prince George's County retaliate against their own for calling out egregious acts of fellow officers. So what do you think that says to the larger community and the culture? And I will close with this. There is not one venue within Prince George's County that can house all of the directly impacted lives, all of the directly impacted young men of color that have been beaten by Prince George's County Police, not even FedEx Field. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Next, we will hear from Nikki Owens, who's the cousin of William Green.
Good morning. My name is Nikki Owens. I'm the cousin of William Green. And first, I would like to remind everyone that, I'm sorry, I thought I could get through this. Tomorrow is the first year anniversary of the death of William Green. Nothing has changed for my family. I'm still up at 2 a.m. on phone calls with my aunt, video chatting while she cries. His children are still mourning. We're all still mourning. Nothing has changed. All officers are not wearing body cameras. The task force that was created was just a way for them to delay making changes. Nothing came from it. Nothing still hasn't come from it. I'm sure when the 2020 Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel annual report comes out, it's going to show that 2020 was no better than 2019. The death of William Green didn't change anything. More people in PG County knows the name of George Floyd more than they know of the person who died in their own backyard. The abuse, use of force amongst the PG County police is well documented. It's well known and it's well documented. There's reports in the Washington Post in 2001 that discuss how bad it is. There's been excessive force in PG County for probably hundreds of years, because the racism, the systemic racism within the PG County Police Department, within the PG County judicial system, it didn't stop with the civil rights movement. It didn't stop with President Barack Obama becoming president, the first Black president. What they did was they just found another way to oppress us, another way to legally abuse us, to legally murder us. This has been going on for hundreds of years. We've been at war with our judicial system for hundreds of years. We are not equal. We are not even close to being equal, because I have never heard of this type of a press conference or this type of panel happening with a bunch of white people saying, hey, I need you to stop killing my husband, and I need you to stop killing my wife and my children. I need you to stop murdering them and brutalizing them. We don't see this with a whole group of white people asking to change laws that should be just standard morals for people. You should have a moral value to not beat and brutalize and murder people in the street. You should have a moral value not to want to hide an investigation. You should feel like that information should be able, the public should know what the people they are paying is doing. My cousin's case should be nationwide. People should be talking about his case from coast to coast, simply because the man who killed him was horrible. It is well documented, the atrocities that he did. He should have not been on the force for 10 years. The management of PG County is poor. The fact that this man didn't slip through the cracks, this man is not an exception. This man is a rule. So there is nothing that I feel that I can say to delegates, to legislators, to anybody about William Green that can change their mind, because they're seeing this. They see all of these families. I've talked on several meetings. Nothing has changed. My cousin's death didn't change anything. My cousin sat in a car handcuffed and was shot 6 times. My cousin died in fear. My cousin died probably confused as to why this man shot him. My cousin died worse than a dog. There was no humanitarian thought put into the death of my cousin. And yet, I have to come onto a meeting and try to convince people to stop this from happening to Black people. I was asked if I wanted to have a bill in my cousin's name. And I told him no. I talked to my aunt, no. Because we just want the same laws to apply to us that apply to white people. That's all. We don't want the percentages of our death to be so extreme, of our arrests to be so extreme, of our children being arrested in a school where they should feel protected. We shouldn't have to worry that the color of our child's skin dictates their future treatment by the people that our tax dollars are paying. But we do. And that speaks volumes to the people in power that can change this and don't, than to the citizens on the street that are being murdered or brutalized. I want William Green's name to be nationwide. I want what happened to him to be nationwide. I want it to just be well known in PG County, so that when PG County goes to vote, they vote for people who make sure that they're not the next William Green, that their child is not the next William Green. I don't think that people truly understand the gravity of how something like this affects families, what Dawn's family went through, the financial burden, the mental burden, the emotional burden. It's hard, and I don't wish it on anyone. But I would just like to ask lawmakers, what is your problem? Why are you okay watching us die in the street like this? Why are you okay watching people that you have some level of control over do this without any type of disciplinary action? So I would like to thank the ACLU for inviting me to speak. And I would just implore everyone to just really consider that these are humans, these are people, these aren't criminals. When you're out there and you raise your fist or you pull your gun, you're not doing that to a criminal. You're doing it to a human that has people that love them. So at one point in your mind, just think about that and understand that you're not just hurting that one person, you're hurting their entire family unit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Our hearts are with you and with all of your family. Next, we will hear from Dorothy Elliott, who is the mother of Archie Elliott III.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Kopp Elliott. I live in Prince George's County, Maryland. I've been here for a long time, more than the years that my son has been deceased. When you have a healthy 24-year-old son who's abruptly taken from you and viciously taken from you, you don't get over it. It's something that lingers. Even now, sometimes I feel like it's just a bad dream, and that my son will walk through that door. But I know that that is wishful thinking. And I have been his voice almost 28 years, this June 18. He was killed a day before my birthday, 2 days before Father's Day. And when you speak of effective policing, it does not mean abusive policing. What do you do with a person that you have arrested? Put him in handcuffs, been searched, no contraband was found. And this is the picture of the young man behind me with the white shirt on. He was 6'1", weighing only 165 pounds. They let him sit on the curb that very hot day in June. He was on his way home from work, and we lived less than 3 or 4 minutes from where he was killed. He happened to have been taking a shortcut home, a residential area, which I was totally not familiar with. And the police officer who stopped him did the search. He placed him on the concrete, and I guess he was waiting for backup instead of taking him to jail. I feel as though my son should be living today as well. And while he waited for backup, people saw my son leaning against the car, the police cruiser. And later, when they passed by, there was yellow tape all around, and people wondered what happened. They heard the shooting, the neighbors, and they thought it was firecrackers because it was very close to the 4th of July. I was told that inside that police cruiser, the temperature should have been around 115 degrees. And If that young white officer, Municipal Jason Levitt, thought that my son posed a threat, he would not have left the ignition on with my son in the car with the windows rolled up, dark tinted windows, mind you, quite different from Prince George's County Police cruisers. And when backup came, they alleged that he was pointing a handgun at them with his hands still cuffed behind his back. Locked into that car, they said that he was pointing a handgun at them. And you really don't treat a dog the way they treated my son, to have shot him 14 times. A total of 22 shots were fired at him. And I was told that medical attention did not come right away. And there are a lot of barriers to getting justice when the police kill your son. They don't give information about the police officers who killed him. And again, this darn Liable has to go. Why repeal it? Why make changes to it? Why not, goddamn it, abolish it? Because that is what is needed. They don't deserve special treatment. They don't deserve any treatment any better than the average citizen. And if they commit a crime, then they should serve the time, or the penalty should be just as strict for them as it would be for anyone else. Shortly after my son was killed, we canvassed the area, and every Wednesday for a good 6 months, on the 18th of the month, we would go and hold a prayer vigil at the site where our son was killed. And the media would come and they would interview us, and they were trying to get information that we were getting. And even our attorney said we did a great job in getting witnesses for him to interview. But lo and behold, our attorney, R. Kenneth Mundy, died about a year and a half, I believe, after Artie was killed. And from then on, our case just went downhill. And I believe you have to have excellent attorneys in order to get the job done. And we interviewed with other attorneys, but we decided that it would take so long, or they decided that they'd have to go through everything that had been done before, which would delay us getting to trial. And of course, after 7-month investigation, the local enforcement officer said no charges against them. We even went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, with 3 judges, and they sided with the police officers, qualified immunity. And it was suggested that we go back to the full 13 judges in the Fourth Circuit, or we could appeal to the US Supreme Court. And Judge Elliott, who's my former husband, said, well, we don't know anybody, we don't have the money. And I said, somebody has got to take this case. And I contacted an attorney that I knew who worked with Jack Olinda. He's in the district, one of the greatest malpractice attorneys, I'm told. So the young lady there referred me to Alan Dershowitz and Professor Lawrence Tribe at Harvard University. Well, Professor Tribe didn't hesitate. He took the case pro bono, along with another attorney here in the district. And of course, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case without comment. So we were lost. We didn't have anywhere else to go. And even Judge Elliott told Bobby Scott and Representative Albert Wynn at that time, where do you go to get justice if you can't get it from the highest court in the land? There is no justice, I believe, when it comes to police killing Black people. And I've often wondered, when I've gone around speaking to so many different groups and in different forums, that I saw no white families, no white mothers, a few Hispanic mothers. And I'm wondering, how come this is so? I know that white people commit crimes. Do the police overlook them? Do they not charge them? Or do they do like they did former Governor Glendenin's son, who was driving under the influence? They took him home. They didn't offer that courtesy to my son. They could have driven him home. He had driven all the way from Virginia on his construction job that day. And he was acutely intoxicated. But again, he complied with the officers. And even the news media said that he was a suspect. You know, they got the suspect. And I had to tell them, what suspect? I said, my son had not committed any crime. And if he had, you wouldn't have known it at that point. So why demonize someone who can't defend themselves? And they offered us a $25,000 settlement if we would just go away and not mention the case anymore. But I said my son's name is going to continue to live on, and it lives on in the scholarship fund that I've created for him, and it's to help young Black students to go to college, to HBCUs. And I was a teacher for 29 years, and I see so many young kids who look like my son, and I had to take leave for 2 years. Really didn't want to go back to teaching, but of course you got to pay the bills. So I went back, and I still continued to talk about my son and what happened. And Amnesty International even sent me to Durban, South Africa for the World Conference Against Racism to talk about the police killings and all the things that are happening and no justice when police kill young Black men. And I've spoken on Capitol Hill quite a few times with Representative Bobby Scott. You know, it's no justice when you don't penalize a person who is causing the pain or who is causing a death when it should not occur. So we don't need really new laws. We just need to enforce the laws that are there. We need to have the laws apply equally and equitable to everybody. And as I said, effective policing does not mean abusive policing. You can take care of a person who commits a crime without killing that person. And if you have them in custody, why let them linger outside a cruiser or inside a cruiser for heaven knows how long? And one of the barriers is that we did not get the autopsy report that we should have gotten when my son was killed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Elliott. Finally, we will hear from Victoria Akingbahim, and then we will take questions in the chat from reporters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Akingbahim, and I'm a graduate of CASA's after-school program, Escalera. I'm a part of CASA's youth committee and a recent graduate of Owens Mills High School. I am a proud immigrant from Nigeria, and when my family and I migrated to the United States in 2015, we very quickly realized what it meant to be Black in America, as we witnessed the murder of Freddie Gray by the hands of police officers the very first year we arrived in the United States. I am in constant fear that my family or even any of my classmates will become the next victims of police brutality or even die at the hands of a police officer due to a simple traffic stop or a conflict on school grounds. This is why I'm here raising my voice today, and will continue advocating with so many youths. Legislators need to limit the risk of police misconduct and escalation incidents in our school by getting rid of school resource officers and making sure Baltimore City residents can hold their own police department accountable through the local leaders they elected into office by bringing local control back to Baltimore City. The worst thing that could happen to any family or student who has lost a loved one or experienced police misconduct is not being able to hold the officer accountable. And our current system does not allow real police accountability. It is time we hold all legislators accountable who do not stand with real police reform this legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing. Now we will take questions from reporters in the chat. We have many people on the line, so I want to make sure that we're able to manage the everyone being heard. So the chat will probably help us out the most with that. Do we have any questions? And I'll also add that we can make a recording of this call available after the event. And it's also, there's live streams of it on Facebook and Twitter as well. Our first question is that several of the priority bills addressed today are expected to be included in the legislation or recommendations from the House Work Group to address police reform and accountability. What is the coalition's perspective or stance surrounding those recommendations and the larger forthcoming bill? Yannette, would you like to address that?
Yeah. Well, I would just say that the devils are in the details. And so we haven't had the opportunity to actually read the text of the bills of the recommendations that have been that came forward from the work group, from the House Work Group. So we'll have to wait to see. But we know that we've been working diligently with our legislative champions and advocates and community members on drafting the language of our bills, which reflect what we think are the most appropriate and necessary reforms this session. So we hope to work with all of the members of the General Assembly to pass the most meaningful reforms. But we have to first see what the House Work Group is going to come forward with actual language first to determine that.
Thanks, Yannette. We also, hold on, we've got a bunch of questions. Let me go back up here. What do you think the opposition will use to thwart your efforts to pass the bills? Does anyone want to speak to that?
Could you repeat the question, please?
What do you think that the opposition will use to thwart your efforts? Or maybe perhaps what are some tactics that we'll use to win?
Well, I can chime in. I think in the area of school resource officers, I think that given the fact that school resource officers are often seen or felt to add safety to a school, there are always comments around, what happens when we remove school resource officers. However, I think the data is clear. The data is in our favor. The data shows us that when it comes to police shootings, for example, that there is no evidence that school resource officers help to reduce those shootings. And the data is also clear that in terms of legislation dealing with mental health, school counselors, restorative justice, and trauma practices, that these are proven methods to improve school safety and just improve the learning experience for students. And so what we'll be doing is just ensuring that we are fact-based, that we are data-driven, and the cost-benefit analysis around the harm to students is something that, in my remarks is clearly shown in terms of arrests, use of force, traumatization of students as well. So we'll be working to ensure that the facts are really out there on the issue of school resource officers.
And I'll just add that, we hear the usual talking points about, they will talk about hypothetical situations and exaggerate those, but we have facts, we have data, and we have real stories to back why we are demanding the changes that we're asking for and have been asking for nearly decades. So we won't spend too much time speculating on opposition tactics, but we know what the truth is. We have the data, we have the research, we have the stories from the communities, and that's what we're going to be pushing this session.
Thank you so much, Yannette. We have another question, a little more technical. How much we know about the timeline for committee hearings, votes, and planned floor votes?
Well, Senator Carter mentioned earlier that the Senate's been working closely with us on these reforms. And so we've had one hearing last week on the to reform the Maryland Public Information Act, also Anton's Law. So that should be coming up for a vote soon, if not later this week. And then we're just awaiting the hearing dates for a couple of our other bills in the Senate. We have a couple of hearings coming up on February 9th for the use of force bill, Liable repeal bill, as well as Anton's Law on February 9th at 1:30 p.m. in the House Judiciary Committee. So we hope that the bills will come up for a vote shortly after that, so we can hurry up and pass these reforms, these necessary reforms before the end of session.
Thank you so much, Yannette. The next question is, hold on, it's just, Is repeal of LIBOR the springboard for all this reform? Is that priority number one?
I can chime in on that one.
Please
so,
go ahead.
Yes. So as I alluded to earlier, LEOBR repeal alone does not provide real transparency and accountability. I'll say that again. LEOBR repeal alone does not provide the public with transparency and real accountability. While LEOBR repeal is certainly a critical piece that is a part of this bigger package around police transparency and accountability, LEOBR repeal is complementary. So in other words, we have to get the transparency or reforming of the Maryland Public Information Act, or Anton's Law, and that will allow for communities to have the kind of a transparency and to be able to root out problem or abusive cops. We have to repeal the LEOBR because what it provides are these undue and unnecessary procedural protections that are codified into law. So yes, that is also a problem. But we also need use of force, as we see in the case of Anton Black, as we see in the case of William Green, and as we see in the case of Freddie Gray or Corin Gaines and so many other victims of police violence. We need to ensure that we have a statewide use of force policy. And we also need independent investigations and prosecutions to ensure that victims, their families, and the communities are getting the justice that they deserve. So I don't want folks to think or to focus attention or advocacy on just LEOBR repeal alone, because if we were to repeal it tomorrow, the public still wouldn't have real transparency and accountability. What we need is the passage of Anton's Law. What we need is the full repeal of the LEOBR. What we need is a use of force standard, and we need to ensure that investigations are independent, as well as prosecutions are independent. And all of that sort of forms, in addition to police-free schools or removing SROs from schools, all of that form part of our push around police accountability. And LEOBR repeal alone would not give the families that you're seeing on this presser today the justice that they've been seeking for a long time. It will not give the communities that continue to show up in Annapolis and in spaces of power the transparency that they've been demanding for a long time. It will not change law enforcement's behavior, because we will not have a use of force standard, a statewide use of force standard, and it would not get us closer to independent prosecution. So yes, we need to repeal the LEOBR, but the LEOBR is one of a suite of legislation that we need to pass this legislative session if we are serious about police reform here in Maryland.
And I'll just add to that, in addition to repealing, we're also working on critical replacement language, especially closely with the Senate, to ensure that it lays out what the due process rights are and procedures, and lays out what those procedures are, including language to ensure that local jurisdictions are able to implement community oversight boards that are able to hold departments accountable when they fail to hold officers accountable within their department.
Thank you so much. We have one final question so far. With so many Prince George's County examples here today, is there support from Prince George's delegates and senators for these bills?
Well, our website lists out all of the legislators that have signed on to our demands. But in addition to that, Delegate Deborah Davis mentioned earlier that repealing the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, passing Anton's Law, which is reforming the Maryland Public Information Act, and establishing a statewide use of force policy are all priorities that the Maryland Legislative Black Caucus have endorsed as their priorities for this legislative session. So within the caucus are members of the Prince George's County delegation who are in support.
And let me highlight that in the chat, there is a link to the coalition website that has a list of current legislative supporters for the 5 demands. And one more question Is there bill number, what are the bill numbers assigned to the Liable repeal initiative?
I can answer that. So I am the House sponsor of LEOBR repeal, and that's House Bill 151. And that is being cross-filed with Senator Joe P. Carter. They were concurrently filed, and the Senate bill, bear with me 1 second.
If it hasn't dropped already, it will drop this week or next week.
Yes, yes. But the House bill for LEOBR repeal is HB 151.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from reporters at this time? We'll give it a minute. And I will put my email address into the chat in case there are any follow-up questions.
Hi, Meredith.
Yes.
I just wanted, I know someone asked a question earlier about the work group recommendations and how is that sort of separate from what we're doing here. Delegate Deborah Davis and I were on the House work group on police accountability in Maryland that the speaker created. And to be clear, we were charged with the responsibility of really looking at 4 areas. One was the viability of body-worn cameras. 2 was whether to reform or repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. 3, use of force, and 4, independent investigations and prosecutions. While as a work group, we voted to recommend a number of other things, somewhat related to the issue of police accountability, our work group was largely charged with those 4 main responsibilities. And so the things that we didn't look at was MPIA reform or Anton's Law. And that's precisely why this coalition, the Maryland Coalition on Justice and Police Accountability, are pushing for MPIA reform or Anton's Law. In addition to that, the work group did not look at the issue of SROs in schools, which is a huge police accountability issue, especially when we look at how Black, Latinx, LGBTQ+, and students with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by the presence of police in schools. In my county alone, Black students account for 1/5 of enrollment in Montgomery County public schools and over half of all of its arrests, right? And that's just Montgomery County. Delegate Deborah Davis can speak to Charles County, which actually their numbers are, and it's sad and really unfortunate to say, but worse than Montgomery County's, right? And so we did not examine that. What we also didn't examine was an issue that I think is very serious to law enforcement, and that is the issue of white nationalism within law enforcement. And I'll just add for the benefit of folks on here that Congressman Jamie Raskin's Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties recently last year released an unredacted FBI assessment about the infiltration of white nationalism in law enforcement. And it is a serious problem. It has been a serious problem. Yannette alluded to that when we talk about the inception of policing in America and its white nationalist foundations. And so if we are serious about police reform and police accountability, we also have to look at white nationalism in law enforcement. That is something that I and a number of other members raised that the work group didn't look at. But I say that to say the reason why the coalition is pushing these bills and our priorities is because we recognize that while the work group did examine a number of important areas around police reform, the work group didn't address all of the issues that would get us to the point of reimagining public safety or real accountability. And I touched on those earlier. And so the priorities that you see today, from ensuring that we get police out of schools or MPIA reform and others, are really policies that we've developed in collaboration with impacted communities. It's certainly necessary that we get it passed. But that's just the distinction between what we're pushing and what the work group did last year over the summer. And I don't know if Delegate Davis has anything to add.
Well, I have nothing extra. Delegate Acevedo did an awesome job. I would just like to add that we are working together. There will be pushback in the area of perhaps we can't get enough votes to make it, what's the word, to overcome what's the word? We can't get enough delegates to make sure that if the governor kicks it back, that we'll be able to overturn it. That's the kind of stuff that we get. We also get, well, there's strong language, so you have to weaken the language, and that's why we need where we need your help. No weak language, no bills without any accountability, no bills without any transparency. We need your help to push forth the strongest of the bills that require accountability.
Thank you. And Yannette would like to address a question that was raised in the chat about why delegates have taken up some independent legislation from the work group legislation. Go ahead, Yannette.
Well, I just want to let Delegate Acevedo and Delegate Davis also answer, but just wanted to say that what's coming out of the work group, from what we understand, is going to be in a package of an omnibus bill package. And we know that what happened in 2016 is that forces us to negotiate on language that is within the package. And when we introduce our own pieces of legislation with sponsors that we've been working closely with, we have a little bit more control over the language that's in it. And so that's why we felt it's a priority this session to, we have to learn from our mistakes and do differently this time. And so working closely with our legislative champions on the right language, the language that has been informed by the community, family members, and experts on these issues.
And I'll also add really quickly that this is not the first time LEOBR repeal has been introduced. Well before the House Work Group on Police Accountability in Maryland was established, there have been legislators introducing LEOBR repeal legislation. In addition to that, there have been legislators who have introduced use of force legislation prior to this work group. I will draw folks' attention to the version of Anton's law that I had introduced last session, House Bill 1090, that included use of force, a statewide use of force policy that was well before we even established this work group. So the trusted voices and the lawmakers that you see on this call this morning are folks who have been working on this legislation well before a work group was established, well before task force were established. And we're just continuing our efforts around police accountability as we have in previous sessions by reintroducing these bills.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Are there any final questions? All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day. We can make available a recording of this to anyone who would like a copy. Take good care.